I wrote a class called employee. An employee has a name, an ID number, and a manager. But look what a manager is. A manager is also an employee. In other words, it points to, or it's the address of, another employee object. And of course, you know what I mean when I say points to or address of. I use this example all the time. It's like if I give you the address of my house, it's not really my house, it's pointing to my house. So this is the constructor for employees. Employees have a name, of course, as I said, an ID number, and a manager. And here I'm setting these instance variables. Underneath it, I have a method to return if two employees have the same manager, and we're going to come back to that. And then I have another method to get somebody's second line manager, and we're going to come back to that as well. And here's my toString method. And finally, my main method tester. And you know by now that you can have the main method or tester in the same class. Sometimes it's in a separate class, and sometimes they refer to that as the tester class or client class. So let's see what's happening first in our tester. I create 4 employees, and I drew pictures of them on the right. The first employee is Alex. That's Alex's ID number. Alex's manager is null. Remember, the third thing that I'm passing into my constructor, here's my constructor up here, is the employee's manager, which is also an employee. I think we talked about that already. Anyway, so that is Alex. Then I created Morgan. This is Morgan's ID. And Morgan's manager is E1, which is Alex. So really what that does is it puts the address of this E1 object. Oops, I gotta click that first. So really I'm pointing at this box. That's what it means when it has the address, or I'm setting this E2 to E1 as the manager. I think I said that correctly. And then I'm creating another employee, Tracy. Tracy also has a manager of E1, so that's E3. So I'm just going to draw another arrow like that. Wow, these are really bad arrows. And then finally, Devin, and Devin's manager is E2. So I'm going to draw Devin like this. All right. So, I wrote a method called second line manager, I don't know if you recall. So a second line manager, of course, is the manager of a manager. So Devin's second line manager would, of course, be Alex. His first line manager would be Morgan, and his second line or second level manager would be Alex. Of course, Tracy has no second level manager, and Alex doesn't even have a manager. I guess Alex is the boss. All right, so now let's look at some of the methods that I wrote, and you'll see that some of them aren't quite right, and we'll have to fix them. Let's first look at the toString method, which of course is getting run right here. When I say print line E1, it's running the toString method on employee E1. So the toString method, you've seen these things all the time, is just returning the name of the employee, the ID number, and the name of the manager. Notice I'm not just saying manager, I'm saying manager.name. What do you think would happen if I just said manager? Do you know? Well, it would try to run the toString method on manager, which is also an employee. So it would rerun the same method. Probably not what you want. All right. So that's why I'm saying manager.name. Now let's look at the method same manager. So E1 is running the method same manager, and I'm passing in E2. So let's look at same manager. Here is same manager. It's returning a Boolean. Now E1 is running same manager, and it's passing in E2 in our first example. So E2 would be the employee. And I want to know if E1 and E2 are the same. You can see by the picture here they're not. Whereas E2 and E3, and I think I run that next, E2 and E3, they do have the same manager, both Alex. Now notice the other kind of funny thing here is I'm using equals equals to see if they have the same manager. This, of course, you know what that means. This is the object that is running this method. It's E1 in this case. And I actually don't even need to use the keyword this here, but sometimes it's a little bit more clear. Anyway, I'm comparing if they have the same manager using equals equals, which I kind of said you shouldn't do for objects. Well, you can do it as long as you're aware of what it's doing. When you use equals equals for objects, it's really asking the question, am I pointing to the same object? In this case, that's really what I want. I want to know if two people have the same manager, it means they're pointing to the same object. It's a little bit different than saying, are two strings equal? Really, you just want to do a letter by letter comparison for a string object, but here, or maybe another object, you often want to use dot equals, but here I really want to say, or I really want to find out, am I pointing to the same object? All right, I hope that makes sense, like I always say. Now let's look at get second line manager. So get second line manager is pretty straightforward too. I'm just running it on a particular object, so e1.get second line manager. We'll get the second line manager of E1. Of course, E1 has no second line manager. E4's second line manager is Alex, of course. So let's see how second line manager works. Also really easy. All I'm doing is saying this dot manager. Well, what that does is it gets the manager's manager. I think that's kind of obvious. Now, if I had a method called get manager, I could run that method also, but I really don't need to, because even though manager is private, as long as I'm in the same class, I can use it. All right, let's run the thing and see what works. And as I said, some things won't work. So now I'll run the program and then we will fix the errors. So here, if I run it, I get an error. Now I left this in there just so you could see the error. This is going to happen to you. The error says null pointer exception. What that means is, in this case anyway, I'm trying to run a method, or I'm trying to access something on an object which is null. Null means it's not pointing to anything. And in this case, the problem here is that I'm trying to get the name of a manager. Not all of my objects have managers. So in other words, I'm trying to access a field or a variable on an object that is null. All right, now I'm going to show you the fixes. So hang in there. So the first thing that I did was in my toString, I made myself a variable called mname, presumably manager name, and I initialized it to none rather. And here I am checking to see if the manager is not null, and if it's not null, then I can get the manager's name. So keep that in mind when you write code where you're pointing to objects and trying to find out things about them. You can't run a method or get information on an object that is null. So that's how I fix that. And you're going to have to do a similar thing. You just test to see if the object is null or not null, and then you can run a method or get a variable, in this case, its name. And I have something quite similar for get second line manager. Again, the problem was that I was trying to get the manager of an object that was null, and you can't do that. So again, I'm asking a very similar thing. If the manager is not null, then I can return the manager of the manager, otherwise return null. And you're going to have to do similar kinds of things, or you're going to end up with some issues in your code. So thanks so much for watching. Ooh, I should run it first just to make sure it works. Oh my God, I can't believe oh, wait a minute. Can't believe I forgot that part. So here I am running, and you'll recall, and I can actually bring this back up here. You'll recall that I have no place to put it, that I printed out information about E1, which was Alex, and this was Alex ID and so forth. Oh, and then I asked, are E1 and E2, do they have the same manager? E1 and E2, they do not have the same manager, but E2 and E3 do have the same manager. That's why I got the false true. And then this null was getting the second line manager of E1, which we know is nobody, but the second line manager of E4, that was Alex. So that's why it printed out Alex's information. All right, well, that's enough of that, and thanks so much for watching.